In parts 1 and 2, we built the theme structure and templates. Now it's time to dive into Theme.json and global style variations. If you haven't watched part 1 or 2 yet, there's a link to the playlist in the resources below, so check them out and come back when you're ready. I think I mentioned this before, but in case I haven't, be sure to check out FullSiteEditing.com. It's a fantastic resource. So what exactly is Theme.json? It's a configuration file. It lets you define global styles, settings, and more for your theme. The confusing thing is that a lot of settings inside Theme.json can be set through the site editor, but many can't. And there really isn't a great resource for knowing what's available in each place. Theme.json is a single file that lives in the root of your theme directory and is split into different sections. Let's take a look at the high-level structure of Theme.json before we create ours. First, we start off with the version, and this just says what version that you're building for. And then you have schema, and this defines the JSON schema. It integrates with code editors and gives you on-the-fly hints and error reporting. Then you've got a section here for settings, and this is going to help define some of the things that control which block controls appear, that configure some presets and some other things. Then you've got styles, and this will apply colors, font sizes, and even some custom CSS. You've got custom templates, and that's going to give you some metadata for custom templates that we create. Template parts, same thing, custom metadata for template parts. And then again, patterns. So this is going to have the slugs to register patterns from the pattern directory. So there really isn't a whole lot that you need to put in Theme.json. You can have as much or as little in there as you want to. It's a very flexible file. This is the Theme.json file that I normally start with. And we've got a few things going on here. So like I said before, we've got our version defined, we've got our schema, and you can see as I hover over these things, it gives us those tooltips. I'm going to skip over appearance tools for right now. And here we have the layout section. This is where we define the content size and the wide size. These titles are a little bit misleading in the WordPress world. Content size is generally what you would expect paragraph content to be. So you don't want paragraph content stretching all the way from one side of your page to the other. Wide size is what we generally think of as being the maximum width of the site. So if you're used to creating things like this by hand, you would generally have an outer container and then an inner container, and then the inner container would have your maximum width. This is what that wide size is defining. It'll probably make a little bit more sense once we get back into the site editor with these settings applied, and you can see what happens on the front end of the site. Next, we're going to drop down to spacing, and here I'm just setting the units that are available. You can't choose any units. Like for example, we can't choose CH. It's just not something that's available inside of WordPress right now. But I did want to choose the ones that are available, which is percentage, pixels, Ms, rems, VH, and VW. And then this root padding aware alignments equals true. This is another one that's a little bit tricky. You can actually Google this if you want. And without getting into too many details, it basically is a setting that lets you change the way that WordPress does full width blocks. So things that would stretch from one end of the screen to the other. You used to have to write some custom CSS to solve that. Now they have that setting inside of Theme.json, and it works pretty well. So this by itself isn't really going to do a whole lot. It's just going to use padding of 0 all the way around. But if we do want to define some padding so that things aren't butting right up against the edges, you would just come in and instead of having settings here, we would come over and we would add a styles section and put in some settings for padding. Now with these in place, we're going to be able to go full width, but any content that we put in there is still going to have some padding on the left and right with no padding on the top and the bottom. Now we skipped over this appearance tools setting. And the reason is that this is a single setting that controls a lot of things. If we come into the block editor, you're going to see that there's a lot of things that we can't do. So let's take a look here inside the block editor again, and we'll see what happens before we put that Theme.json in place with appearance tools and then after. So here I have a list selected, and you can see that we have very, very basic controls. We've got typography sizes and the advanced controls. We can change the color of the text, the color of the background, but if we click on here, we don't have a whole lot more settings. We can change appearance, letter spacing, text decoration, and letter case. So appearance is just going to let us change the font weight, letter spacing, decoration, and of course the case. I'm going to switch over to our themes directory again inside the WordPress installation. And here inside of our theme folder, I'm going to create that theme.json file. And we'll just paste those contents in here. Now I'll save that. And when we refresh this page, you'll see that we have a lot more. So now for dimensions, we can add padding and margin. We can also add line height, which we couldn't do before. If we add a group block, which also includes rows and stacks, Now on this group, we can do a lot more things with it. We can set the position to default or sticky. We've got a lot more control over dimensions. So we've got padding and margin and block spacing. We can also set border and border radius, and we can choose background color. So in that theme.json, if we hover over this tooltip, we'll see all those things that it can change. So the background image, not background color, sorry about that. We can do border color, radius, style, and width. Link color, which is something that you can't do by default. You can set the minimum height and dimensions, position equals sticky, your block gap, margin, padding. You can set line height and typography. So this is a whole lot easier to use this one setting to just turn all those things on rather than enabling them all piece by piece. If you think about it though, this really is a lot of power to give a general user. So sometimes you might want to create a site that's a little bit more locked down, and we'll talk about locking down these themes in a later lesson. But sometimes you might want to create one that's a little bit more locked down. And what I would do in that case is I would do appearance tools while I'm creating the theme, then take that out later on and put in just the settings that they're allowed to make. So these settings here give us a pretty decent foundation, but there's a whole lot more that you can do with theme.json, and we'll explore that next. Actually, while I'm thinking about it, before we add more settings to theme.json, let's take a look at all the ones that we already have in place. So this layout is a really important one. And I want to show it to you and just do a quick demonstration. So keep in mind over here, we've got the content size set to 620 and the wide size set to 1200. We'll come back to this test page. I'm going to update it and we'll preview it on the front end so you can see what it looks like. There we go. And now I'm going to remove that so you can see what happens. So I'm just going to cut these out and save my changes. We're going to refresh this page. And now you can see it's gone full width and it gives us our 2 rems of padding on the side. So by having our content size and wide size in there, it's now constraining the width to 620 pixels. But that's probably not what I want, right? We're going to want that just a little bit wider. So in order to do that, let's come up to Edit Site. And we'll start off with our page template. We're going to edit that page template. And here we want to change a few things. We want to change our general header. When we open that up, inside of group, we can say inner contents use content width, and that's going to let us come over to our row and take this little icon here, our alignment icon, and tell it that instead of the content width, we want to use wide width. I'm going to do the same thing for our footer. And here in the footer, I'm going to first go ahead and toggle this so you can see what happens. So before you saw that I left the content width checkbox checked there and then changed the setting on the row. If I go back to the footer here and change this, you're going to see it goes full width. We're going to save and preview that. And here you can see that the header is doing exactly what we want. The footer, however, is going all the way across, but it's not respecting that padding that we had put in place. So it's definitely not what we want to happen. Let's close some of these windows because I'm just confusing myself. So instead of unchecking this, I'm going to leave that checked and then come into the rows in there and tell it to use the width that I want to use. Header and footer now look good. And we'll come over to our main content area and do the same thing. And when we refresh, it's still not doing it. Now, why is that? Because I'm changing the page template, not the front page template. So let's just come over here and switch to front page. Now, because I already did my header and footer and those are template parts, I don't need to change them again, but I do need to come in to each one of the templates and change it here for the main body section. The reason I don't create a template part for this body section so that I can reuse it time and time again is because a template part is going to hold everything inside of there. So I can't create a template part just for this group and row, but have whatever's inside of there be unique. Now, if we come over to the front end again and reload, you'll see that everything now is at our wide width setting. I'm not going to bore you by changing all the templates here on the video, but I'll go ahead and do it on the back end so that we have all the templates set up correctly for when we look at those types of pages. I do want to show you over here back to the block editor. If we come in and take a look at our styles, before we only had typography and colors, but now because we've defined layout inside of theme.json, we have this layout setting inside the styles panel. And you can see there we've got our content width and our wide width. And we have our padding set. And it also has the default block spacing of 24 pixels set. So just know that where the settings are available in the front end inside the site editor, If you make the change in Theme.json, you will see it here in the site editor as well. Now keep in mind also that any changes that you make inside the site editor will get written to the database. So you won't see those changes come back into Theme.json unless you export it and overwrite the file. So this is again one of those places where things can get really tricky, really confusing with WordPress, where you've got some things that are happening inside the files, some things happening inside the database, and not really a great way of knowing what's what unless you understand what the priority is. So now that I've shown you everything that we have inside of Theme.json already, now we're going to start adding more to it to help configure the theme a little bit more and configure the settings a little bit more. For that, I'm going to come over to Full Site Editing with WordPress, FullSiteEditing.com. This site is a fantastic resource. Please, please check it out. It's getting a little bit more confusing to navigate every day. So, that's an unfortunate thing. But there's just so much good information here. I can't recommend it highly enough. So the section we want to spend most time in is going to be this developer section. Let's go into there. And on the sidebar, you see a list of topics, which are good, but this doesn't actually give us all the information that we want. To get all the information we need, you've got to come here into course content. And this is where they really break it down into more detail. So for example, I'm going to click on global styles in Theme.json. And it's got a lot of information. However, when we go to enable or disable features, it says it's a limited overview. For more in-depth information, please read the respective lesson. Cool, where's my link to the lesson? I don't know. So we come back here to the root of the developer page. And now under Theme.json, we've got all these lessons. And this is what we actually want, the cheat sheet, every setting that you can remove using Theme.json. I actually love this page because it tells me all the things that I can remove, which also tells me a lot of the things that I can turn on. So let's quickly take a look at this example Theme.json file. So this is telling us that we can change all sorts of properties about the border, the color, radius, style, and width. For color, oh my gosh, look at all these settings that we can either turn on or turn off. Dimensions, minimum height, we don't have that yet. We've got maximum height. We've already played with our layout. Position sticky, that is also taken care of by our appearance tool setting. Spacing, block gap, we can set block gap to nothing if we want to. We've got margin padding, we can set the units of course, custom spacing sizes, and then spacing scales. We can do shadow presets and lots of other settings for typography. So if you've ever been in the block editor and you're like, why don't I have access to whatever setting? Chances are you can probably turn it on here inside of Theme.json. So let's go ahead and play with our settings a little bit and add some more controls. For now, we're going to be focused on this settings area. So I'm going to collapse styles just so that it's out of the way. We've got appearance tools set to true, so that already enables a lot of things for us. We've got our content size and wide size in layout, and we've got units for spacing. Let's start off with some color settings. Now here is one of those places where I put a lot of settings in that aren't really necessary because I went through and created all the settings for the things that I can turn off just so that I remember what they are, and I set them to true so that later on I can come back and set them to false when I need to. So let's add our color settings in here, and I'll paste these properties in. And here we can allow users to set background colors. We can allow them to set custom colors. We can do custom duotones, custom gradients. We're going to enable the default duotones and gradients and the default color palette. Some of these things I personally like to turn off just for cleanliness sake, but for the purposes of this tutorial, I'm going to leave them all on so that you can see what they all are. So all these settings in here are things that we could do normally inside the interface. So I'm just going to save this. And now we're going to start getting a little bit interesting because now we're going to define a custom color palette. So switching over to our page, if I take a look at the styles and go into palette, you're going to see we've got the default palette enabled and nothing inside of the custom colors. We can come in here and create these manually if we want, but then it becomes a hassle to get them back out again. We'll get more into exporting and packaging themes later on, but right now there's no great way to export and manage everything all at once. It's kind of a mixed process of in some places coming in and using this export tool, in some places using a plugin, and then in other places we have to come in and manually edit files. So although you can come in here and do custom palette from here, I really do prefer using it inside of Theme.json directly. The syntax for it is pretty simple. We just add another property, a palette, and in there we're going to add an array that contains all of our colors. So we're going to start off by adding one color called primary. And let's just close that array. And then inside that array, we've got the color defined as either hex or RGB. We've got the name of the color, and this is going to be the display name. and then the slug of the color. I'm going to just paste in a few more so that you can see what we have. So here we have a primary color, a secondary color, tertiary, contrast, black color, a dark color, base, light, white, and then a transparent color. Let's save this and take a look on the front end. And now when we open our colors, you'll see we have 20 colors. We've got our default colors, and now we have those standard theme colors that we created. And this is one of the other advantages of defining the colors inside Theme.json rather than doing it here inside custom. Custom would be something that users can create themselves generally, but by putting it in Theme.json, it adds it here to this theme section. If I want, I can come in and hit show details, and we can see the names for all these guys and their properties. On a lot of sites, I'll even go through and I'll create a light and dark variant of each of our primary, secondary, and tertiary colors for things like hovering. But for this tutorial, I didn't want to overwhelm us with a huge color palette. The next thing I want to do is come in and define some spacing sizes, and I want to do that using fluid spacing with clamp. So let's show you what we have in here by default. I'll just click on this paragraph, and we can look at our padding and margin, because this is where we would see our spacing. Now you can see here we've got our spacing sizes of 0 through 7. This is a convention that WordPress uses. So you will always want spacing sizes called 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7, and then we would define the sizes there. You can always come in and add custom sizes if you need to, or if you click on these little guys, you can see what they all represent. However, we don't want to use the default ones. I want to create some custom ones. So for that, I'm going to come back to good old Theme.json. We already have our spacing section in there with the units defined. So I just need to come in and add a property for spacing sizes. And again, this one is also going to be an array, and the properties of it are going to look like this, where we have the name is going to be either that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7. We have the size, and then we have a slug. And for those, we want the identifiers to be in the form of 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, etc., etc. 50 is always going to represent a medium size. It's really important here for sizing that we keep that naming convention. Otherwise, lots of things start getting screwed up. So there we go. I've got the one in for my smallest size. Let's add the others in. I'm just going to paste them. So here we have one. This is the smallest, and that's going to have a fixed 0.5 rems. The next one up, this is where we start getting into clamps, and you can always find clamp calculators just about anywhere. This is the one that I generally like. It's on markbacon.com, but they're all over the place, and it really just keeps you from having to do the math yourself. There's lots of tutorials out there on what clamp is and how to use it, so I'm not going to cover that right now. Maybe I'll make my own video at some point, but again, I think it's been covered to death elsewhere. So back to Theme.json, I've got 2 set up, and that's going to be 1 rem at the highest. Next is going to be 3. This represents our next highest. That's going to be 1.5 rem. 4 is 2 rems. 5, this is our medium spacing at 2.5 rems. 6 is 3.5, and then 7 is 5 rems. We'll save this guy, and then when we reload our page and select something, and now when we scroll them like this, you're going to see them move to our new sizes. Now, if I click on the custom size button, before where you could see what that represented, we can't see that anymore, because by default, it's not going to show us what the clamps are, because we're using clamps, which is a calculated size rather than a defined size like pixels, rems, ems, or anything else. Even if we come in here to rem, we're still not going to see it. So unfortunately, that's just one of those places where the interface of WordPress isn't really that great. Let's just save this. And now when we check it out on the front end, you can see that it's there. Let's go into the inspector, and you can see our element style has padding top and bottom is spacing 70. When we click on that, you can see that it is the clamp that we defined. The next thing that we're going to tackle is typography, and there's going to be a lot in here. So let's hit that now. So back to our Theme.json, let's start collapsing some things because it's going to start getting ugly real quick. I'm going to collapse spacing since there's a lot there, and I'll collapse color. And now we're going to create properties for typography. So we'll do that here. And in there, we want to do a few things that are pretty basic. So here we've got custom font sizes, which is default. Drop cap equals true. This is another default setting. And fluid equals true. And that's going to allow us to do fluid typography. If we take a look on the front end and we add all these different controls for typography, we can see that we've got those in there. So we can set our custom sizes. We can enable drop caps if we want. And then fluid typography is something that happens on the back end when we define the font sizes inside of Theme.json. What we don't have, if you take a look at appearance, we don't have any custom fonts defined. So we've got the default appearance, and that lets us set the font weight, but we don't really have a font style or anything that lets us change the actual font that's being used. Even if we come over here to the style book, typography, we don't have anything in there that lets us change which font family is being used. So that's the first thing we're going to add in. So right under fluid, I'm going to add the font families property, and we're going to add 3 font families here. I've got a font family for system fonts. This is always a good one to have, and that's just going to let us use whatever's already installed in the system. I've got another one with a sans serif font and one with a serif font. I try to keep these fonts generic because they're going to be browser independent and operating system independent. Whether you're running Mac, Windows, or Linux, you should have these fonts in there. And when we refresh our page and check out some typography, we will now see font family. So I can now choose my system fonts, my sans serif fonts, or my serif fonts. If you're a little bit confused by how these work, it's very similar to what you do inside of CSS. So first you have to define the font family name, then you put in the friendly name of it that you see on the front end, and then the slug that WordPress uses. So this font family name is something that's built into the font itself, and it works by priority. So this is saying that it's going to try Arial first. If we can't find that, it'll do Helvetica. If it can't find that, it will just use a default sans serif, whatever's on the computer. Same thing here, it'll try Georgia. If that doesn't exist, it'll fall back to serif. And then this is probably the most complicated one because it's got a bunch of fallbacks. So you can see it starts off with the Apple system and then gradually falls back to more and more things until finally it says use whatever sans serif is the default on the system. So with our font families defined, let's go ahead and do some custom font sizes. And this is where we can get into some fluid typography. Again, looking on the front end, we can see that we have small, medium, large, and extra large defined. If we click on any of these and hit the custom size, you'll see that it's 13 pixels for small, medium is 20, large is 36, extra large is 42. Those are just the built-in defaults for WordPress. I don't want to use any of those. So let's clear all that out, and we're going to define our own font sizes inside Theme.json. Now we're back in Theme.json, and we're going to add our properties for font sizes. So we'll come back here to our typography section, and here we've got our font families, and just below that, we're going to create our font sizes, and this is also going to be an array. So we'll do the open bracket, close bracket, and here is just one of them so that you can see what it looks like. So the smallest font size with the name and slug of small is going to be 1 rem, and it's not going to have fluid typography. This next one, which is medium, does have fluid typography. So I do this pretty much in the same way as I did the one without fluid typography, except this time I have a property for fluid, and I put in there the minimum and maximum size that I want those fonts to be. So it works with Clamp, except it's going to use the properties here in layout to define the size of the page. That way, all we need to do is define the minimum and maximum sizes. Let's go ahead and paste in some values for large, extra large, and XXL. And we'll save this. And you can see now we have small, medium, large, XL, and XXL. So if you remember before, we only had extra large. It did not go to XXL. And you can see that they're taking effect. Let's go ahead and use this one so that we can see what happens on the front end. We can see that our font size is 60 pixels. And as I get smaller, the fluid typography changes along with it. If we check out the styles, you can see that the font family is set there using the variable, and our font size is using this WP preset font size XXL. It's probably worth noting what happens with those slugs. So here inside Theme.json, we're giving things slugs that say something like, XXL or the color name or whatever that is. But on the front end, it's taking those slugs and it's prefixing them with WP preset. So if you ever need to reference those variables again, You just need to keep that in mind that it's not the slug by itself. It's going to be --wp --preset then the slug name. Let's come back here to this page because I just can't look at this. It's hurting my brain. We'll set that to medium and save it because there's a few more properties that I want to set. I want to add these few properties in here. I'm just going to add them right to the end of our typography section. And this is just again letting us set the things to true explicitly so that later on if we decide that we want to turn off any of these properties, we don't have to go hunting down what they are. So those are the basic settings that I like to put into my theme.json. And keep in mind, there's still a lot more that you can put in there. And again, FullSiteEditing is a great resource to go looking for those. Your other option is to just come in here to your theme.json file and open up this schema URL, which is also going to show you that JSON file along with the tooltips for everything. So if you want to dig through here, you can, but it's not really something that I want to look at. The WordPress Theme Developer Handbook also has theme.json information in there. I know they're doing a lot of work to update this. Right now, it's a little bit behind what it should be, and I don't think it's as good a resource as FullSiteEditing.com. I do know that they're working on updating this and changing the format of it, so hopefully in a few months, it'll be much better than it is today. So that's pretty much all I'm going to cover in terms of settings for theme.json. We got a really good sense for how to do typography, how to do spacing, how to add color palettes, how to turn settings on and off. Now we're going to turn our attention to setting default styles inside of theme.json. The good news about style settings is that you can do most of it through the site editor inside of WordPress, unlike the settings that we had to manage inside of theme.json directly. Almost everything we do in here can get written back to theme.json, but doesn't necessarily need to. And again, this is one of those places where certain settings are going to live inside the database only until you bake them into your theme.json file. So things will start getting a little bit confusing here. I'm going to set a few settings directly inside theme.json just so that you can see how that works. And then we're going to switch over to the site editor so that we can set more settings. And then I'll quickly do an export to show you how to get all that back out again. So the first thing that I want to do is to set the background color. And I want to set that to my preset color of light. And then I want to set a default text color of base. We'll look here inside the site editor. And if we look at colors, we can set that if we need to for both background and text. But we're going to do it inside theme.json so that you can see it take effect here. And before we get to background and text, I actually want to do one more thing. I want to set our block gap to be a spacing variable instead of the default of 24 pixels. So if you remember correctly, if we look here at layout, this block spacing is by default set to 24 pixels, but that's not really what I want. I don't want that set to pixels at all, to be honest with you. But now we have variables and we have fluid spacing that we can work with. So instead of just leaving the default, I'm going to create a new property here, a block gap. And in there, we're going to tell it that we want to use the CSS variable WP preset spacing 30. And just a few minutes ago, I showed you how it takes that slug, which in this case is 30, and it appends some things on there for the variable names. So we actually need to use the CSS variable, not the WordPress slug here. So let's save that guy, and we'll refresh it on this end. And when we take a look at layout, we can see our block spacing now has the slider instead of a defined unit, and it's set to 3. So that's 30. And now let's do the same thing for background and text colors. So we'll just come down here below spacing and we'll paste in our color. And we've got our background color here set to our preset color of light. And then text color is going to be set to our preset color of base. And if we take a look here, we've got colors and we have the color already set to base for text color. And background is now set to light. The last thing that I'm going to do here is to add in some preset settings for typography. So I want to set my default font family to be system fonts. My default font size is going to be medium, which is already the default. And then my line height wants to be 1.5. And after a refresh, you can see there's a significant change on the page. Now, this is one of those places where in previous videos and in other videos that I've made, I've complained about the fact that styles sometimes look different inside the editor than they do on the front end. And that's usually because we're using CSS files directly. By keeping the CSS inside of theme.json, it makes sure that it gets applied to both places. So whether we're looking at it here inside the block editor or on the front end, it's going to look the same. Now, those settings that I showed you are pretty straightforward. They're pretty simple to just understand off the top of your head, but putting this stuff in using Theme.json is not a very visual experience, and it is not a very intuitive experience. And I certainly wouldn't want to have to configure every single block type using this text file. So that is where the style book comes into play. This is a pretty easy way to come in and find the blocks that you want to configure and make the changes. So again, here inside the block editor, I just chose to use styles, and then I clicked on the little eye icon to show the style book. And now I'm going to go over to my blocks. So for this example, I want to change the default look and feel of these button blocks. So I'm going to first start off by coming over to buttons, because this is going to control what happens when you have the group of buttons, and then the button block itself controls the individual button. So for buttons, I want my default font size to be medium. I want them to be uppercase. And I want the weight to be medium. Coming back to the button one, I've got an outline variation and a regular variation. So right now I'm just going to control the regular variation. And what I want to do there is I want to make the text light and the background of the button my primary color. I also want to change the radius. I don't want it quite this rounded. So I'm just going to change the radius to 5. And now let's adjust that padding a little bit. Because I think they are just a tiny bit too big. So I'm going to go with a padding of 1 on the top and bottom and 2 on the sides. A good general rule of thumb for button padding is I like to make the top and bottom half of what I make the left and right. If I want to set a shadow, I can. So I can use these preset shadows, or I can create my own shadows inside of Theme.json and select them here. But for these purposes, I do not want button shadows. And now we'll save this. And again, because we did all this here inside of WordPress, not inside Theme.json, we're not going to see it get reflected back into our file. If we want to make changes directly to the file, we can export this and then copy and paste. So for this example, I actually do want to do that because I want to add hover styles, which I can't do through the interface. Why? Because WordPress. So what we're going to do is a little bit backwards, and I hate that we have to do it this way, but I'm going to come up here to my settings, and options and export. And what this is going to do, and I'll get more into detail with this when we talk about packaging the theme, this is going to download and export the theme that we created as a zip file. Unfortunately, it only gets about half of it right, and there's still some modification that we need to make after the fact. So I wish it was going to be as easy as just saying export and done, but it's not. But anyway, we're going to export this guy. And now when I look inside that zip file, I see a lot of our theme already created. So I've got those theme parts that we made before with the query loop and our header and footer. I've got our theme templates, our style.css. But this is really what I want is our theme.json file. So I'm just going to view this guy. And you can already see that it's decided to rearrange some things on us, which is fine. But we're now going to come on through here and we're going to find the block styles that we just created. So here we go. Under styles, we have blocks, and we have our core button, and then our core buttons. So I'm going to take both of these guys along with our blocks and copy that. So now inside of our theme.json, we've got spacing, which I'm going to collapse. We've got color, I'll collapse that, and typography. And now I want to paste in that code for blocks. So I'll just add a comma there, paste in what we have for blocks. So now it's going to be giving us our block specific styles. If we reload it on the front end, you'll see that nothing's really changed. And I want to point this out to you as well, because if we look here in theme.json, if we change this primary button color to secondary and we reload, it's not going to take effect here. And that's because changes that you make inside of the WordPress style panel take precedence over any styles inside theme.json. So just keep that in mind. Anything you do here inside the UI is going to take precedence, even if you change what happens inside theme.json. If I want to go back and let theme.json take precedence again, I can come in here to color and say reset all. And now my theme.json file takes precedence, but that's only for what's here inside color. So it's very confusing unless you understand what's happening behind the scenes there. I'm going to save this because we do still need to set our hover styles. So to set that hover and focus style, we're actually going to use the CSS pseudo selector of focus here inside of Theme.json. So inside of styles, we actually want to create another one called elements. We're not going to use blocks, we're going to use elements. Why? Because. And inside of elements, we're going to say button. And inside of button, we're going to paste in our focus pseudo selector. When we come to the front end and we tab to the button, we can see now that we have the border. Although when we hover over it, we're not getting anything. So we also need to do a similar thing with hover. So we'll just come back here and take that focus and add one for hover. So now when we hover, we also get that. If you come over here to FullSiteEditing.com, they actually have a page that talks all about using hover and focus styles inside Theme.json. And it's definitely worth a look. If you remember from earlier in this video, we talked about several top-level sections of Theme.json. So far, we've touched on settings and styles, but we haven't done anything with custom templates, template parts, or patterns. Let's take a quick look at template parts since we already have some of those created. If we switch back to the export that we did to get the Theme.json file, you can see in here we've got our template parts of general footer 2 and general header and query loop, and we have our templates. And these templates are the normal templates that we would use that match up with the WP hierarchy. What we're going to focus on are these template parts. Looking at these, you can see that they're named general-footer-2 or general-header or query-loop. If we look inside of them and view them, you'll see that there's no place in the code that has a friendly name like we see inside WordPress. So this general-footer-2 can only be referenced by the slug general-footer-2. However, if we look here inside WordPress, it's just called general footer. And if we edit a template that uses it, again, it's called general footer. If we come over to the block properties and say advanced, you'll see that the title is general footer and the area is footer. So how do we connect this friendly name general footer to that slug general-footer-2? That's where the template parts section inside of Theme.json comes into play. So in here, we're going to create an array that has the area for the template part, the friendly name or the title of the template part, and then the name or the slug of the template part. So I'll copy this and we'll create another top level section inside of Theme.json called template parts. And this is going to be an array. And inside of that array, we're going to put sections in here for general header, general footer, and query loop. For the areas, if you remember correctly, we have 3 different areas that we can use. We have a header area, a footer area, or a general area for everything else. So having these template parts named inside of Theme.json will allow WordPress to understand what the title or the friendly name is for each of these template parts, regardless of whether we're using this site or picking it up and moving it to a different site. There's not really anything to show you here for a demonstration at this point, but once we get into the section about packaging up and distributing the themes, this will become a lot more apparent. For custom templates and patterns, we'll actually go over to the Theme.json schema, and we'll see that they follow a very similar pattern to the template parts. So for custom templates, we can give it the properties for name, a property for title, and a property for the custom post type. And patterns is very simple. It really just gives us a place to register patterns. Registering patterns isn't exactly the most intuitive process right now. It's something that WordPress is working on. Hopefully it'll be better in version 6.5, but I'm guessing it's going to get pushed off until a later version. The last thing that I want to cover in this video is global style variations. So this can be used for all sorts of stuff. Most commonly it can be used for setting up a dark theme and a light theme, but you can have it change the styles of just about anything. You can have it create variations on your color palette, on your fonts, and just about any style that you would set inside of a block and Theme.json can be overwritten by these global style variations. Here again on FullSiteEditing.com, they've got a pretty good tutorial that talks about them, how to use them, how to set them up, what their purpose is, and where to find more information. To create a style variation, you need to have a styles folder inside of your theme folder. And then inside of that styles folder, you're going to create JSON files that override your theme.json. So just like in this example here, they've got a theme.json at the root, and then a styles folder, and then inside they've got a blue.json and a dark.json. They also have that templates folder and the parts folder just like we do. So coming back to VS Code, you can see we have our BTFS demo folder, and this is our main theme folder. And then under that, we have our templates folder with our blank index.html. I'm just going to collapse that so that we don't have to worry about it. And right here at the root, I'm going to create a new folder called styles. And in there, I want to create a dark.json. In this dark.json file, we're basically going to have a version number, a title so that we know what it's called, a description of it, and then the parts that we're going to override in our theme.json. So in this example, we're going to override the styles, color, background, and text properties. I'm going to do a similar thing. I'm going to create another one called white.json. And this time we're going to call it white with a white background and base text. And again, styles, color, and we're going to override background with our preset white color and our text with our base. And now when we refresh the site editor, we can come in here to styles, and we'll see that we have our default style, and this has our light background. Our dark style has base for the background and light for text. And then our white style has a white background with base color text. Now looking at the dark background, this actually isn't what I want. So let's come through here one more time, and we're going to edit our dark.json to use our dark color instead. And when we reload, you can see dark now uses the dark color instead of that base color. So it's that simple to create styles inside of the site editor that override what we've done with theme.json. I know this has been a long video and that we covered a lot of things, and there's still a lot more to cover. In fact, I could probably create a few hours worth of content just on theme.json if we really wanted to, but no one really wants to. So instead, I'm going to leave you with this. It should be enough to whet your appetite to let you know what's possible so that you can take it from there and learn more on your own. In the next part of this series, we're going to talk all about packaging your block theme. I already talked a little bit about the challenges there, and we already touched on it a tiny bit when we did the export, but there's a lot more to it than that. And I promise you, that video will not be nearly as complicated or as long as this one. So thank you again for sticking with me, and I'll see you next time.